Hey there, and welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we do the digging so you don't have to.
Today, we're diving headfirst into a topic that might seem ripped from the headlines, digital warfare.
But before you picture tanks and trenches, we're actually talking about how everyday tech can be twisted and turned into something, well, dangerous.
It's easy to dismiss digital warfare as something from a spy thriller, but the reality is it's more relevant now than ever before.
Especially as our homes fill up with smart devices, from those voice-activated assistants to even robot vacuums.
These seemingly harmless gadgets can become vulnerable entry points for attacks.
That's right, we're not just talking theory here.
You actually sent over some research, digital warfare, using household weapons, which lays out some pretty unsettling scenarios.
And get this, it even kicks things off with a real-world example, that incident in Lebanon recently.
Yes, that was a stark reminder of how technology can be turned against us.
In September, thousands of ordinary electronic devices, things like pagers and radios, suddenly exploded across Lebanon.
The human cost was significant. 36 lives lost and almost 3,000 people injured.
Investigators believe this was a coordinated attack that weaponized everyday tech.
That's chilling. It really brings home the point that digital threats aren't just about stolen data.
We're talking about potential for real-world harm, even violence, triggered remotely.
I think the research calls out this tendency we have to focus on convenience and overlook the potential downsides of all this tech we surround ourselves with.
Exactly. The document argues that we've become so accustomed to the seamless integration of technology into our lives that we often neglect the potential risks.
We bring these devices into our homes, our cars, essentially every aspect of our lives without fully grasping the implications.
Okay, so we're talking about a blurring line between convenience and vulnerability.
And to illustrate that point, the research dives into specific examples of everyday technology that could be weaponized, starting with something many of us rely on, electric vehicles or EVs.
And it even uses a pop culture reference to drive home the point.
Remember that scene in Fast and Furious 8 where they hack a fleet of cars, turning them into remote-controlled weapons?
While that might seem like pure Hollywood fiction, the reality is security researchers have demonstrated similar vulnerabilities in real-world EVs.
Wait, seriously?
You're telling me our cars could be hacked and turned against us?
It's not quite as dramatic as in the movies, but the potential is there.
The report cites research from Consumer Watchdog and Sandia National Laboratories, where they were able to remotely manipulate critical car functions, like the brakes and engine, by exploiting software flaws.
These weren't even highly sophisticated targeted attacks. They were able to demonstrate these vulnerabilities using relatively simple methods.
So someone could theoretically cut off your brakes or even take control of your steering wheel remotely?
That's terrifying.
And it's not just the cars themselves, right? What about EV charging stations?
Those seem like they could be prime targets, too.
Absolutely.
The research highlights charging stations as a critical point of vulnerability.
Imagine a scenario where hackers could disable a city's charging infrastructure, or, even more concerning, disrupt the power grid itself.
The impact on EV owners would be immediate and potentially devastating.
Okay, so we've established that our cars, particularly EVs, might not be as safe and secure as we thought.
But the research also calls out another piece of tech that's rapidly becoming commonplace: drones.
I mean, we know they're used for everything from surveillance to package delivery these days, but are we really talking about them as potential weapons?
While most people associate drones with harmless hobbies or commercial applications, they have a darker side that we can't ignore.
The document highlights two chilling examples that underscore their potential as weapons.
All right, let's hear them. I'm all ears.
In 2018, there was an assassination attempt on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
Using a drone carrying explosive.
While the attack was ultimately unsuccessful.
It demonstrated how easily a commercially available drone could be modified for malicious purposes.
Wow, that's intense.
And I'm guessing it's not just about drones as explosives.
They can cause major chaos, even without carrying anything dangerous with them.
Absolutely right.
The document also mentions the 2018 shutdown of Gatwick Airport in the UK,
Which was caused by multiple drone sightings near the runways,
It brought air traffic to a standstill for days,
impacting thousands of passengers.
and highlighting the vulnerability of critical infrastructure to even unsophisticated drone attacks.
It's a good reminder that we often think of these as isolated incidents.
But they represent a much broader trend that's only going to become more prevalent.
Speaking of trends, this next one really surprised me.
the report dives into robot vacuums.
Those little things that scoot around our floors as a potential security risk.
I have to admit, when I first read that, I thought, robot vacuums.
Seriously.
I know, it does seem a bit far-fetched.
But when you consider the technology involved,
It makes sense.
the document actually mentions a recent data breach involving the iRobot Roomba J7 series,
Where these vacuums were capturing images.
including private moments, like someone using the bathroom.
And unfortunately, that data ended up being leaked.
Wait, leaked publicly?
I thought we were talking about security cameras or something.
How does a robot vacuum even capture those kinds of images?
It comes down to the technology they use for navigation.
These high-end robot vacuums utilize a combination of sensors and cameras to map out your home and avoid obstacles.
In this specific instance, there were security flaws in the software that allowed hackers to access the images captured by those cameras.
Okay, so we're not just talking about hypothetical risks here.
Real people had their privacy violated.
But the document goes a step further.
Mentioning something called a LiDAR phone attack.
I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what that is.
So LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging.
And it's a technology that uses lasers to measure distances,
It's becoming increasingly common in all sorts of devices.
including those robot vacuums we were just discussing.
Okay, so it's like a more advanced form of sonar.
Exactly.
And what researchers discovered is that by analyzing the subtle reflections of these LiDAR lasers...
They could actually capture audio from inside a room.
Wait, are you telling me that my robot vacuum could be eavesdropping on my conversations?
Well, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
That's essentially what this research demonstrates.
And we're not just talking about picking up muffled sounds.
This LiDAR phone attack was able to identify spoken words?
And even differentiate between male and female voices.
Okay, that's officially creeping me out.
So if I'm understanding this correctly,
Someone could potentially use my robot vacuum to listen in on my conversations.
steal personal information.
Or even figure out when I'm home and when I'm not.
That's taking things to a whole new level.
That's exactly the point the document is trying to drive home.
We can't just assume that our devices are secure.
Or that our privacy is being protected.
The responsibility ultimately falls on us as individuals.
To be more aware of the potential risks and take steps to mitigate them.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I need to go full-on tinfoil hat here.
Should I be covering up my robot vacuum's cameras?
What can we actually do to protect ourselves in this increasingly vulnerable digital world?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the tinfoil hat.
A healthy dose of skepticism is a good starting point.
The document actually talks about how former President Jimmy Carter used snail mail and a typewriter for confidential messages
Even after leaving office.
to ensure their privacy.
Interesting.
While I don't think I'm ready to give up email entirely, I get the point.
We've become so reliant on digital communication that we rarely stop to think about the potential consequences.
Exactly.
And the document highlights another factor that contributes to our vulnerability.
Something they call mental laziness.
Mental laziness.
That sounds harsh.
What exactly does that mean in this context?
It's not about being lazy in the traditional sense.
It's about our tendency to blindly accept the convenience of technology without questioning the trade-offs.
Without taking the time to understand the potential risks or explore alternative approaches.
For example, how many of us actually read those lengthy terms and conditions before clicking accept?
Okay, guilty as charged.
I'm the king of scrolling to the bottom and hitting agree without a second thought.
But I'm sensing there's a bigger picture point here that goes beyond just reading the fine print.
You're right.
The document uses this idea of mental laziness to illustrate a broader point about the importance of fostering a more critical and discerning approach to technology.
It tells a really interesting anecdote about a missed opportunity in the Caribbean region.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Tell me more.
Apparently, there was this ICT consultant,
Safford Martin.
and he was developing his own operating system.
Like a Caribbean-made alternative.
To things like Windows or macOS.
Wow, a homegrown operating system.
That would have been huge.
What happened?
Unfortunately, it never really took off.
The document suggests that maybe there was a missed opportunity
Both for Mr. Martin and the region as a whole.
to kind of support a homegrown tech innovator.
So are you saying we should be more focused on creating our own solutions instead of just relying on these big tech companies?
It's not about cutting ourselves off from the global tech ecosystem entirely.
But it does raise some interesting questions.
The document draws a parallel with China's strategy,
of developing their own social media platforms and technology products.
which reduces their dependence on companies based in other countries.
It's about recognizing the strategic importance of technological independence.
And diversifying our options.
It's definitely making me think about the bigger picture here.
We often talk about the digital divide in terms of access to technology.
But maybe there's another layer to it.
A divide in terms of who controls and shapes that technology.
Exactly.
And this all ties back to that idea of mental laziness we were discussing.
If we're not careful.
We risk sleepwalking into a future where our choices are limited.
And our digital lives are dictated by a handful of powerful entities.
It's like we've been so focused on the shiny new gadgets
that we haven't stopped to consider the potential consequences of putting all our eggs in one basket.
Precisely.
And the document ends on a rather thought-provoking note, referencing George Orwell's dystopian novel.
1984.
Okay, Orwell always freaks me out a little.
Big Brother, watching your every move, thought police.
It's all a bit much.
Are you suggesting we're headed toward a real-life version of 1984?
Not necessarily.
But it's a cautionary tale that highlights the importance of vigilance.
The technology exists for that level of surveillance.
And the erosion of privacy is an ongoing concern.
It's a reminder that we can't take our freedoms for granted.
And that we need to be active participants in shaping the digital future we want to see.
Wow, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
It's been eye-opening.
If a little unsettling.
What would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
What's the one thing you hope they'll remember from this conversation?
I think the key message here is awareness.
Be mindful of the technology you invite into your life.
Understand the potential risks, both in terms of privacy and security.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Challenge the status quo and demand better from the companies that create and control these technologies.
It's a good reminder that just because something is convenient or widely accepted
doesn't mean it's inherently safe or beneficial.
We need to be more discerning about the choices we make in the digital world.
Absolutely.
The choices we make today will shape the digital landscape of tomorrow.
Well said. Listener name, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of new technology.
But it's crucial to stay informed and make conscious choices about the role you want it to play in your life.
Until next time, stay curious.